Everyone, good morning from Boulder, Colorado. Welcome to the first installment of our Young Stage Managers interview series. We will be posting interviews with stage managers all across the nation every week on Fridays. And for our first interview, I'm so happy to discuss assisting on Broadway with none other than Christopher Anaya-Gorman. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Just a disclaimer for everyone. I have asked, no, he cannot share any secrets on Harry Potter. I tried bribing, it didn't work. Um, so, Christopher, I think we must go over the obligatory interview question, which is your career trajectory. So, where did you begin stage management and how did you get here?
Well, I actually found stage management in college. I went to the University of Arizona, where I originally set off to be a computer engineer. And after one semester in that, I was like, no, thank you. And then a little soul searching and a couple conversations with some folks, including my mother, reminded me how much I enjoyed theater and that maybe I should just go do something that I like for a while until I find out what I want to do. And that led me to our theater program at the University of Arizona, where, of course, the first thing I thought I wanted to do was be an actor. And I kind of set myself up to do that. And I was decent. I got into an alternate position with the program the following year, which meant though that I would be in the classes as an acting major, but I would not officially be in the BFA program, which meant that I could or could not have potentially wasted a year in the program. And having already changed my major, that wasn't really an option for me to extend another semester or full year on my degree seeking. So a mentor of mine at the time, who was a professor of mine, sort of just always said, or she observed me, I guess, and said, you seem to really learn by observing as opposed to like reading, because we had other classes together. And so she knew some of my, you know, shortcomings, but she was right. I did learn by observing. And so she said, how about you just be a stage manager? And then that way you're in the room and you can just be with the directors, be with the actors. You'll learn the program as an actor, but just from the seat of a stage manager.
Mhm.
I had no idea what a stage manager was. Not a clue. All she said was, you'll be in the room. And I don't even think I really knew what that meant in terms of a stage manager, but it sounded interesting. And I found the woman in charge of our stage management program. And I literally marched into her office and said, hi, I'm Chris. I want to switch to stage management and I want to be on this show. Not knowing how any of the formalities work. I just was stubborn and said, this is what I want. And so anyway, I joined the program and slowly but surely fell in love with stage management. I got matched up with the right mentors for the program, the other stage managers that were above me. At the time when I joined, there was only like 3 people studying stage management. And then in my class alone, I was the only one directly in my class. And then I think the next year, like there was just a boom of stage managers. But in hindsight, I was paired with the right individual who showed me the balance of fun and hard work, which I value to this day. And I tell her all the time, any chance I can get. And then, yeah, I ended up graduating with a full BFA in stage management from there. And I've been doing it since.
So interesting. I kind of had the same trajectory, except you were in Arizona and now you're in New York City. So can you speak to, so you graduate from University of Arizona.
Mhm.
What is the first decision that you make out of college?
Um, Am I going to pay the bills? No. Yeah, I mean, so I graduated at the height of the recession in 2009. And a lot of individuals in my craft, like peers and people I had met along the way, were saying how, jobs were scarce and that there was sort of a benefit to it, but also there was a shift in how others are seeing jobs right now. And what that really meant for me was that someone who's graduating, I was already going to have to look for internships or apprenticeships, something in that scope. But what I had also heard was that because a lot of people were trying to rebalance their budgets from the recession, that some jobs that used to be sort of equity positions that they could have changed, or jobs where they were starting to open up equity jobs, were becoming folded into this apprenticeship idea.
Mm.
um, but I had done the right thing. I applied for two or three, which probably honestly wasn't enough, but I was lucky, and I had interviewed for those, and then I ended up sort of waiting around that summer, unsure, hadn't heard anything, and sort of starting to really kind of worry what was next for me, because I was in Tucson, Arizona still. I was from New Mexico. I knew I didn't want to go back home, but I also didn't know what else to do with my degree and my craft if I wasn't going to have a job waiting for me in the theater. But patience um, worked out, and I had a woman that was my director for my last two shows in college, who was also the associate artistic director for the regional theater in our college town at Arizona Theater Company. And because we had two shows together, we actually became really good friends, even to this day. And she reached out saying that ATC was looking for two different jobs openings. One was actually in stage management as an intern for the season, and the other was an actual full-time job as the assistant to the production manager.
Mm.
And she thought I'd be qualified for both, but wanted to let me know and asked what I was doing, etc. So I applied for both, and I was actually offered both, but I ended up sort of having to sit back and decide which was best for me. And actually, I chose the assistant to the production manager job over the stage management job. And the reason for that was, for me, it was financial.
Mm.
I needed to pay my bills. I come from a household with a single mother, and she was very honest from day one that there's no hidden money anywhere, and whatever I set off to do, I need to do on my own. And but the advantage to that job was, not only was I working in the office under the production manager and the associate, I also had to run crew as part of an ad needed basis for the show. So I was still going to get to execute and exercise my backstage knowledge, which in my mind at the time meant that I was going to be busy and I was guaranteed overtime. And I was always saying yes. I was always someone who said, you need me for the weekend, you need me for the day, I'll do it. So anyway, that sort of set off my professional career. I
Mm.
worked there for 2 years. I met a lot of wonderful people, and that ended up taking me to Utah Shakes that summer. And then, because we were still in the recession period, after 2 years, Arizona Theater Company was ready to move me into the ASM position, which I was excited to do, and I had said yes. However, that summer, when I was at Utah, they called and said that they restructured their season to accommodate a new budget, which meant that I would only get one of three shows for this season. And they felt that I may not want that, but if I did, that the one show that I could have would be mine. But if I wanted to pursue other opportunities, then that would be okay. And the other thing is, because also at that time, mm, I didn't have the other job to fall back on, because that one was also cut from the budget. So the job I had been doing for 2 years was cut to a part-time job. And then, and I knew at that point I wanted to get back into stage management. I had spent 2 years watching a lot of peers and colleagues, and of course I was visiting my university time to time, and that energy from the room and shows and just listening to people and watching people do things in New York or elsewhere in stage management really started to creep in, and I wanted to get back to it. But I also really wanted to get to the East Coast. So um, that same woman that had called me for the job at Arizona Theater Company actually was moving to DC and becoming the director of education there. And she knew about what was happening at ATC, and she then called me again and said, we need a company management intern. And she says, I know it's not stage management, but we pay and we provide housing, so the two together is livable, and you can get introductions to people on the East Coast. We'll get you there, all the sound logic. And I interviewed and was offered the job. So I headed to the East Coast that fall. And I spent 3.5, almost 4 years in DC, primarily at Shakespeare Theater Company. I also got the opportunity to work at Signature Theater, and of course network with other individuals at other theaters, both through my company management role and my stage management duties. I also did a little stint between company management and stage management at that theater at Goodspeed Musicals, where I got to do one show there, which of course one show there was almost 5 months. So that's always great. Um, so yeah, I set a path to do that. And then what happened after that? So then, yeah, so I moved to New York on a whirlwind in the fall, October 1st, 2015. I remember the date. And it was just very circumstantial and happenstance. I didn't plan for it. It kind of just happened to me. I had just finished up at Goodspeed again, where I returned after leaving my job at Shakespeare, for different reasons, but I left the job, and uh, I ended up working with an actor who saw something in me. Um, and so when he had the chance that fall, he put my name in for a Broadway show where they actually needed an additional prompter for a show. And I woke up to a phone call from the company management uh, member who was representing the GM company, and they said, "This is what's going on. This is what we need. Your name came to us through um, this person, and are you available? What's going on?" And it all happened so fast. Like, they literally thought I was in New York. It was number one. They thought I was in New York. I wasn't. And the only reason why they found that out was because I had said something about the weather in my response to "How are you today?" And they were sort of like, "Wait, what? Where are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm in DC. You know, it's kind of gloomy. It's raining." And I guess in New York, it was a sunny day. So they were like, "Wait, hold on." Um, and it literally turned into, "Oh, I don't think this is going to work. I don't, we actually need someone who can start today." And I said, "Well, what time do you need them by?" And he just said, "Well, we would really like someone here by 7 o'clock PM." And I was like, "Well, I can be there." And they were like, "Wait, what?" And I just was like, "I can be there." And they were like, "So you'd be willing to, if you were offered this, you would be willing to get to like pack some bags, get on a train and get here by then?" I was like, "I'll do you better. I have a car. So the moment you say go, I can hang up this phone and be in the car after a couple errands and get there probably by 4 or 5." Um, so they took that information, said they'd call me back. 5 minutes later, they said, "Everyone agrees that they want you, that they want me." And they said, "It sounds like you have some things you need to do, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock." So that was my introduction to New York City and my first Broadway show. And the thing that I always like to share about that is that you never know where your next job is going to come from. Because the person that gave me my Broadway break, as we like to lovingly call, was an actor who was no one special at the time. I mean, I love him dearly now, but you know, he was a part of my Act Two places. Yeah, we spent 4 months together at Goodspeed and we talked a little bit, but he wasn't, I wouldn't say the person I bonded with the most that summer, but he had dated someone who was a stage manager, or is a stage manager and a Broadway stage manager for 5 or 6 years at the time. And so he knew what it took to be a good stage manager. He knew what qualities to observe. Um, and I guess he saw those in me. And as a result of that, when he was asked as the fellow prompter on the show that um, we trust your opinion, and he thought of me out of all the people he could have thought of. And that launched me into the New York scene. I wasn't sure if I was going to stay or not after the first show because, again, it was sort of, it happened. I had no housing. I had nothing, no connection to New York whatsoever, other than a couple individuals that I knew were here. And the freelance life sort of scared me because I had been working regionally for the last 10-ish years. So I had always been on a year or 2 year contracts at a time. And I really liked that stability. But then here I was, New York, limited engagement. I knew it was closing at a certain time, but I was lucky. I was asked to do a second Broadway show before that one closed. So I already knew that I had something to do, and it sort of just rearranged my life. I got rid of my apartment in DC, and I ended up becoming a PA on The Father at Manhattan Theater Club,
Mm.
which is the show that got me my equity card. I had tried for my equity card several times over the years that I mentioned, and I was offered it 3 times, but circumstances and other things made me decide I wasn't ready, or nor did I want my equity card at those times. But I knew that's what I wanted next, because I actually turned down getting my equity card that fall when I was offered this Broadway show. But this Broadway show was going to be a non-equity contract because I was not actually an actor or a stage manager on the show. Um, and that was a hard decision. I almost said no. I almost said no to this Broadway opportunity and to this role, because I really, really had fought, especially those last 3 years, to get my equity card in DC, and it wasn't happening. And finally, I was getting offered it, and I called a lot of mentors and said, "What do I do?" Uh, and in the end, everyone was right, and I followed my gut instinct, which was just get to New York and see what happens. So the gentleman that called me for The Father, who I had also worked with in DC because he was a guest stage manager for us on the show. He had tried to get me to New York shortly after working with me in DC, but of course I said I can't work for, the little pay that was currently happening at the time in New York City. And so I was finally there, and he said, "I need a PA for my next show, and if you want it, it's yours. Like, I won't even look for anybody else," which I totally value to this day. But true to his word, I got to sub on the show, which meant that I got my equity card with him. And it became a show that just kept on giving. I um, was a PA on it. I learned a lot about how PAs function on Broadway versus in the regional world, because it was very different for me. Um, so I had a learning curve I needed to grasp onto. I got my equity card. The show had a star in the show who we developed a strong working relationship and presence with each other, that he was not okay with me leaving the show. So when he found out that my role ended at opening, he told the GMs that that wasn't going to happen. And I ended up having my contract extended to the length of the show. So win for me, I actually got an additional paycheck and got to stay on the show. But because I was also the sub, it was really convenient for the stage management team to sort of get to um, use me and get to learn other things that I wouldn't normally have gotten to learn by having if I left the show right at opening. And that included, again, of course, as a sub, I got to learn the deck and run the deck when the state within the ASM was calling, but then the PSM also valued teaching their subs to call. So I also got to call my first Broadway show off of that. And it really just was a show that just kept giving, and I'm thankful. So that show happened. I ended up actually going to Miami that summer, which was my little break from New York, but again, freelance, and it was the thing that was happening for me. Came back to New York that fall, and again, I was a little figuring out New York. I had some contacts, of course, from the shows I was doing, and kept networking and reaching out. I got asked to do a show at the new school, which they have a guest artist contract. And so I was the ASM, and then actually bumped up to be the PSM when the original PSM got another opportunity that they took. And then I actually went to, they asked me back, they wanted me to come back and do a show, but then I was offered a regional contract at Cleveland Playhouse. So I actually left again. But another funny story is I got that job because I was on the subway, and there was a gentleman that I had worked with back at Arizona Theater Company on the train. And I have not seen him since I was in Arizona. And he was just on the train, and it was one of those days where I was tired, and I had gotten a seat on the subway, and I was so thankful for that. And I saw him at the other end of the train, and part of me was like, oh, I'll just text him or call him saying that I saw him, and it was good to see him. But because I wanted my seat. I did. I really was tired that day, and I wanted my seat. But he was there, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to get up and go say hi. So I gave up my seat, walked down to the end of the train. I tapped him on the shoulder. We hugged. It was like, oh my God, how are you? I filled him in on a little of my life. And 2 weeks later, he texts me saying, "Are you available for the show? Because I just lost my assistant." All because I happened to reconnect with him on the train that day. So I ended up going to Cleveland Playhouse, and it worked out perfectly because at that point I had also already landed my PA role on the Aladdin National Tour, which was going to be originated out of Chicago. And it was only going to be like 4 days apart. So it was perfect. Like I said, I'm going to get equity weeks. I'm going to get my experience at a regional theater that I don't know, which I thought was going to strengthen me for Aladdin. And of course, it was from like New York, Ohio to Chicago that it was just this perfect little loop. And uh, so I ended up doing that. And I went to Chicago. I did the Aladdin tour. That was about 4 months in Chicago, which was fantastic. I was there through opening. Um, and then I moved back to New York after that, finished up because was given another job opportunity in New York right afterward. Um, and then since that time until where we are now, I've been in New York steadily. I've not had to leave for work. I've been consistent in New York City. And that has led me to 3 Broadway shows, starting out as a PA and subbing on 2 of the 3, and getting to ASM, 3 off-Broadway shows, and one of which I actually got to bump up and hold the reins as the PSM for the last 2 weeks of the run. And yeah, and then where we just left off with the shutdown was I was the ASM on 72 Miles to Go at Roundabout Theater Company, which we made it to opening that Tuesday, and we did 1 show Wednesday, and Thursday afternoon is when they said we're going to shut down for the month. But I was also a sub at Jagged at the time, so I was layering in sub dates with them, and the following week was I was going to start this weird this balance between part-time at each of them for my own negotiation that I had done with them, because the Jagged had meaning to me that it was worth fighting for in the negotiation, and thankfully I had a history with Roundabout, so we had a nice chat and were able to accommodate what I wanted, and everyone was on board, and that's sort of where we left off, and now we're just waiting.
Nice. Thank you.
Of
Moral of
course.
the story, kids, talk to people on the subway. Okay. Take out your earphones and talk to people because it will get you your next job. No. So one
It's
thing I
true
want
though.
to it is true. See, I'm a quiet New Yorker and I would never, but
I mean, I can say that people, I mean, I got Jagged Little Pill because I ran into the PSM at an equity meeting and said hi.
Mhm.
And he thought I was not available, but turned out I was, and he put me on the show.
You were very proactive. I love your story of
The thing is, it's not even. I mean, yes, it's proactiveness, but the thing is, my intent wasn't give me a job. It was like I know you even a little bit, and I'm gonna say hi. I'm gonna just be a
yeah,
decent human being and say how are you.
yeah. I want to touch on you discussed experiencing the differences between production assisting on regional versus on Broadway.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you can speak to, in a Broadway sense, your roles and responsibilities as a production assistant.
I find that the roles. It's a good question because I wish someone had told me sort of more what the expectations were for Broadway when I actually had my first chance. Because I did. I fell into the category of, even though I had worked with the PSM before at a regional theater where I knew everything and I knew sort of how, like, what I was comfortable doing and not doing. Uh, but he recognized things in me and he said that I had an instinct that you just can't teach, which I'm thankful for.
Mhm.
But that instinct that I had needed to be sheltered a little bit more in the Broadway network, only because of the way that things get assembled. And it's also sort of just show to show. I have done now, again, 7 commercial productions, 5 of which directly on Broadway and 2 national tours. But um, the team breakdown is sort of based on who are your leaders and what the show needs, and also sort of where it's at in the process.
Mhm.
Um, you have to be ready to do anything and everything, but in terms of Broadway, you will find yourself more out and about as a PA, out and about running errands. And that may include having to get the paper from Staples when you're running low, getting the ink, meeting your props people and or other individuals coming in and out of the room to help them get to the rehearsal room, um, getting coffee for the director, getting their lunch, making orders for stars. And what that all really means to say is that you might not always be in the room. You will miss staging. You will not always be up to date on the um, uh, most happenings of things. Whereas when I was in the regional theater, I had never left the room as a PA, like other than to maybe go get this actor who wasn't there ready to do their scene. That's natural. But this idea of running around the city and doing errands and doing legwork for the simplest of things just like was nothing in my vernacular at the time. Uh, so that was very new to me. So that's sort of always, I think, a steady duty for PAs on Broadway, but it's also, again, is the team, I mean, is it a musical where there's 3 stage managers, maybe 4, and then you have 2 to 3 PAs? Or is it a play where more often than not, you get one of each? You get 1 PSM, 1 ASM, and 1 PA, and you're a team of 3, and then therefore you're getting to do a little more of the paperwork. For Jagged Little Pill, that one was a interesting one because I had actually started with the show when it was doing its Boston Lort production, but it had already had the commercial enhancement behind it. So there was hopes and plans for it to go to Broadway, and all of those individuals on that commercial side were with us and in the background, but it was primarily a Lort production. It was primarily an ART production. It was their show. Because it might not have made it to Broadway, and all it would have been is a ART show. But that one was a beast. That one was very intricate, and myself and the other PA that was hired with me, we had 2. We're both equity. We're both have had our own careers in our own rights. And we knew what at that point knew what it took to be a stage manager, and we knew what it took to get certain things done and what to look out for, and that ended up helping us in the long run. That we were able to just create documents that ended up serving the production as a whole, and still to this day are used. But if you ask me how comparing that to like Anastasia tour that I did as the PA, I didn't, I had no role as creating any kind of special paperwork. It was more a dissemination of duties from the first. You're generally following what the first says. I have found that, a lot of times, like there's always a special relationship between an ASM and a PA, but I find that that relationship is even greater in the commercial field, because in the regional world, and I've worked at, I had to count, but I would say I worked probably at 6+ regional theaters. And it's all sort of the same, that the stage managers more, the PSM as we would call them, the leader of the stage management team is sort of the one that we're all in communication with. And not to say this doesn't happen on Broadway, but the direct, like, day to day, hey, what do you need me to do? Hey, what can I do for you? X, Y, and Z sort of momentum comes directly from the first. Like, you're sort of getting your duties from the first on Broadway and keeping up with them, and you have more of a rapport with them than you do the PSM. Whereas in regional, I felt that PSM still had a lot more of their, like, that role of like, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? As opposed to sort of going to, like, sort of letting them manage the 171 producers, et cetera, and the commercial aspects of the show. I don't know, did that make sense? It's a little hard without having been there. So I hope that gives some clarity.
It does, thank you. So if you were to have an intern on a production, would you be delegating to that intern, or would that be, where would they go to on the team structure?
The intern is, so actually when I did The Secret Life of Bees, we had an intern.
Mm-hmm.
We actually decided that, the PSM that I had, Samantha Watson, she felt going into the show, the actual production, because she had been with the show, I think 3 times they had done this show, or a variation of, they had done the reading, the workshop, another workshop, and another reading. By the time we actually made it into production and we're doing the show that folks got to see at Atlantic Theater. But she called me after I was hired and said that she really felt that we needed another team member on the show, and that she had talked to the right people and got approval to hire an intern. And so we ended up hiring this amazing kid who actually wasn't really a kid. He was a education I won't say education director, but his life was not theater is the point, and he decided he wanted to be a stage manager in the last year and wanted to get experience and be in the room of any room. And at the time, Secret Life of Peace was his largest production he got to be a part of, and so he was very eager, very willing to just do what we needed to do. So that really actually set us up to use him a little more how I was used to as a Broadway PA in my mind, because Samantha had done Broadway, I had done Broadway. The show had commercial enhancement and there was plans for it to transfer. So we had a very Broadway mindset in the room. And that intern, I was primarily the person that was delegating to both my actual PA, who I considered more an ASM, like my left-hand man, for a lot of the stuff going on in the room because it was a lot, and then allowing the PA to take on a little more, but also having to, a watchful eye, because also I knew that he didn't go to school for this, he didn't know some of the things that were going on. But Samantha was also very much involved in things that he needed to do at times, but it was very much me being like, hey, Thomas, I need you to go do this. I need you to go do that. Or like actually leave the room or go run these errands or whatever that may be. And then just Samantha would be like, oh, where's Thomas? And I was like, oh, he's out running errands because of X, Y, and Z. And she'd be like, okay, great. But we also had a script PA in the room. So Samantha and the script PA worked a lot closer together than I think her and my intern PA. Like we all, of course, did check-ins and we were very much conscious of what everyone was doing. But again, we sort of found ourselves in the environment that as the assistant stage manager, I was delegating most of their day-to-day.
Thank you. I want to go back to something that you said, that somebody told you that you had a unique sense of instinct. And I'm curious as to what you mean by this instinct as a PA, and if you can give us a vague example of when you use that instinct.
Good question. I mean, the thing is, I understand it because I also look for it too. Like it's something. It's just one of those things you can't teach, but it's also one of those things that really gets somebody ahead. And we all have it in different ways. But I think what this individual meant for me at the time was we had done a production together at Shakespeare Theater, and it was a show that I actually really loved, but I think part of it was I remember once in rehearsal, the actor, like one of the actors, because it was a comedy, was sort of tripping up over some lines that sort of came really fast. And because we were sort of shifting, and staging how we were presenting that, getting to stay with the lines and the action were a little difficult. And he ended up asking, hey, can, at some point, can I get the text in this book so that I can, not have to worry about carrying my papers and or like forgetting the lines when we're staging. And everyone in the room was like, oh yeah, sure. But they took it as like we'll get to it. But my mind took it as, well, we're doing the scene right now and we're seeing him struggle and we keep stopping. So I literally ripped out my page and I cut it to the size of the book and just started walking towards him. And everyone just saw me and waiting like, oh my God, that's great. And the director was like, oh my God, thank you. And the actor was like, oh my God, thank you. And we were able to actually stage the scene the way that we wanted. And then once they continued, I just stepped out, reprinted a new page and stuck it in my book. And it was sort of those things where it's like everyone was sort of like, everyone wanted to do it. Everyone wanted to help him. But, again, it was just this idea of like, oh, well, you're giving us a timeline to say, can we do it eventually? Whereas I saw the room as like, it needed to happen now. So there's that. And there was also another moment in the show where there was this like loud noise coming from off stage, and we hadn't really developed what that was yet, but it was, again, it was clear to me that we needed something, and I just ended up looking around my feet, and I found this jewelry box that Costumes gives us as just stock jewelry in case we ever find ourselves needing like a necklace or whatever. But it was basically almost like a makeshift crash box. And when we got to the scene again, I just started, like, the moment there was this, like, this PSM would just say noise, and we all knew that meant noise off stage. But then I just, all of a sudden one day, I just started rattling the shit out of this thing, and everyone turned and looked at me, but it made sense. And no, and it ended up working, and I ended up doing it for every rehearsal up until we got to tech and until we got a real crash box. And it was just sort of those kind of things where it's like you read the situation, whether it's an actor or whether it's during staging or whether it's with your team, that you sort of read the situation and respond to it appropriately. And again, appropriately is subjective, but I think I think for that individual stage manager, it was that, like, it was sort of those things that I did during that process where he said, you get what needs to get done on a lot, like you think bigger picture, and you help solve things that you can in the room. Um, because it was also that show was one of my favorite makeshift props in the moment. The actor had to have a top hat, and the top hat was apparently his size, but it kept sliding down. And I called the wardrobe department and I said, do you have another hat we could use? Because it's really messing us up. And they were like, no, we don't. And I told the PSM that. They said they don't have another one. So he's like, okay, but it just kept, and it was starting to bother the director that this hat kept messing up his eye vision, and like, it just was not working for him. And so after I just kept hearing these complaints about it, that I just was like, I got to find something to make this hat fit. And I actually went to the stage management kit and I pulled out a maxi pad and I padded the hat with the maxi pad, like two different maxi pads that actually ended up working perfectly. And I literally just went up to him in the middle and I said, hey, come here, took off the hat. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, oh my God, don't tell. And it was funny, but like, that's what it was, but it worked. And the director was happy. He was happy that he no longer had to like be worried that the director was unhappy that he couldn't act because of this hat. And it fit. And so that was our solution. But it was just those sort of things that I think is, again, where you can really bring something to a room if you are sort of that engaged in the problem solving.
Yeah, I love that you found your passion for both props and sound design in those moments. No, so there's a lot of moments of excitement and spontaneity, and on that, I'm wondering, like, what is your favorite, if you had to choose one, your favorite aspect of assisting?
I think, I mean, that, I mean, there are definitely many things, and I think it depends on what arena we're in.
Mhm.
Um, my favorite thing about assisting is getting to sort of usually, and again, I say this with a grain of salt, I have found myself on more new works than not,
Mhm.
either as a PA or an assistant. Um, and the one thing that I have found that I have come to enjoy being a part of the new work arena as a PA assistant is that since I'm the one sort of always up on my feet already when we're sort of creating new structure to a scene, whether that be new props or how to handle things or where things should go, um, because I have all the information on like how things connect with each other more directly than the PSM, like, they have it too, but they're watching so many other things that like, I know that in the next scene, if we change this, it means that.
Mhm.
Um, or that this item is actually still available, or this item hasn't been used yet and I requested it on the prop list 2 weeks ago, but it seems like something that's going to be helpful here. That I get to sort of suggest and offer up insight to those sort of um, challenges or moments of staging that come up in terms of you know progression of the staging for the director and the actors. So that would sort of be, I think that would be the number one in terms of just narrowing it down to one thing. I don't know if you meant specifically with the stage management team alone, but that is sort of what comes to mind.
Yeah, I appreciate your handling these questions. I know that there's like an internal monologue of like, okay, I need to pick one thing out of these multitude of responsibilities. So I must ask the opposite of what is the most difficult thing of assisting and why?
I think my answer is going to be more specific towards where I'm at in my career as opposed to um, speaking for everyone.
Sure.
But as someone who has shifted between, because in addition to PAing and I mean, I have stage managed a few workshops and a couple regional productions as well. So I've been in all seats that a stage manager can have. And I believe I naturally have a stage manager's instinct, a PSM instinct to problem solve or think ahead or look at the bigger picture. And I think for me, the times when I find myself as an assistant in positions where I am not actually the one to really offer up a suggestion at the time and or deliver a final verdict, um, I have to sometimes just sit back and let them do what they need to do, um, in terms of a conversation or making a decision about something, whether it's, you know, how should our schedule go tomorrow, or what are our options if we do this or do that. And I don't discount anyone I've ever worked with for doing what they do, but I just find myself at times overhearing or being again on the sidelines to a conversation where a lot of times I see a director just needing more guidance than I think some stage managers give them in terms of, is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I completely throw the schedule out the window and do this instead? Or um, and a lot of times, and for me, and I was taught too, I was taught sort of, do whatever the director wants and help them form that path. But sometimes I've also been in a place situation where I've said, hey, just so you know, if you want to start rehearsal at 11, that's your call. We just have to end by this time and, whatever X, Y, and Z. Because I just feel that they're sometimes looking for, I just need one more hour to myself in the morning. I need to really do this interview, but I don't want to be away from rehearsal for the hour. How can I? And I think that to me is where I struggle with being the assistant, where it's sort of not my place always to do that. And, sometimes you build a relationship with someone as a PSM, ASM relationship, and you get to very much bounce those ideas off of each other. But sometimes those conversations come up very in the moment that
Mhm.
there's no time to bounce those ideas. So I find myself when it's sort of when I'm ready to, or when I have that mindset of greater problem solving, but I'm in the role as assistant to be sort of more the struggle for myself.
Right. I'm just side question. What's your sign? Do you believe in horoscopes?
Well, I mean, yes, because I have a tattoo of my sign. So
Uh,
I am a Taurus.
okay.
I am dead center, stubborn as hell, but also very much logical and dedicated. So
Because I relate to what you said so much in assisting, and I'm an Aries, so I'm very passionate. Um, so I was just curious. So thank you. Um, I have a question. So some of the questions I've been asking have been from our Facebook and Instagram at Young Stage Managers. Have to plug it within the interview. Another question from Facebook is, what is something that you wish you knew when you began your career?
that question is all. It's interesting because that question always is. I think it's just sort of like a nice plug and play for so many of these interviews, and it's really hard to answer that question because I think just going back to what you said about zodiac signs, I am someone who definitely feels if you didn't do all the things you did previously, you wouldn't be where you are today. So would that
Mhm,
advice really have changed anything for you, or would you have wanted it to change anything for you?
mhm.
So that's my spiritual answer. But um again, if I have to sort of look back at my career, I don't think it's really about what I wish somebody had told me. I wish it's what somebody had taught me.
Mhm,
And that is simply the art of um, interviewing, and the art of that sort of networking combo.
mhm,
Because it's something I've had to learn on my own over the years. And the reason I say that is because you, we all know there are more stage managers than there are jobs most of the time, and all the time. But many people get to get called in for an interview, and so it's that moment of, yes, there may be 9 other people coming in today to have to for the same job you want, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you got to be one among them. And so those, you were there because honestly, the people that asked you to be there want you to be the one. They want to stop looking for, to fill the position. They like want to get their team already solidified so they can start actively using everybody and start thinking ahead about how this team is going to work. So um, the intimidation of people feeling like they're still not worthy to even be a part of the team because it's just an interview. I'm always like, celebrate the interview, because that means you were one of however many people getting to actually get the chance to try and get the role. So get that out of your head, and focus on the interview in terms of what you can bring to the team, but also what this team or show or experience may bring you. Of course, there's definitely a style to interviewing and always have the questions and be engaged and all that. But I wish someone had taught me that, because in my undergrad, which I really, really value, in hindsight, having worked with so many people that had different programs or no programs at all or lack thereof, I saw how lucky I was. But one thing that we never were really given the chance to was figure out how to navigate the job markets, how to decide where you want to work, what market you want to be in. Okay, I just got this offer, but I'm currently unavailable, but I really, really want to work for this company or this person. How do I simply respond to this without coming off as, don't ever call me again? Or, how do you maintain, I'm unavailable right now because I'm doing this, but please, please, please think of me in the future. Like, all of those things were never really taught or explained to me. And in my early career, I was very stressed when it was, again, because I had just started in DC, and actually Broadway had called me when I, like, literally a month after arriving in DC. But I knew I couldn't just throw my hands up and say, oh my God, Broadway called, I'm going to go PA for them, because the company had already waited 4 months for me to finish another job to get me in at the job that I had just taken. So I couldn't just run towards the shiny light. But I was like, well, this Broadway GM just called me, and I don't know how they got my info, but they did. But I'm unavailable. Like, I can't do it. And
Mm.
I did not know how to respond to that call. Like, I know how to handle it now. And I called people and I handled it. But I mean, but it was, I just really didn't know what to do internally in those moments. So I think that's where I wish someone had just, again, shown me the reality of the business, um, in terms of going from job to job.
Thank you. What I appreciate you in saying that is also that in the beginning of the interview, you're talking about making connections and having interviews, being in different states, that it seems like you really paved your own path, and that you are your style of networking is very proactive, is very spontaneous, which for me personally in my training is very fresh, and it's very different from what I'm taught. So I'm glad that you speak on that. um, I wanna shift gears, because you are doing double duty on many shows. You are a production assistant. You're also subbing for stage managers. So um, you talked about learning the call. I'm interested in a Broadway process, and I know we can't condense it all to one, but common trends. What is the process of either learning a call or deck track?
Well, the process is going to vary on how much you know the show. Like, if you were a PA on a Broadway show where you were already in the room, you were with them through tech, you were with them through opening, you know the people, you know the crew, you know the cues for the most part. Um, you know the songs, you know the numbers, you know the faces. Like if you know all those things because you were a PA and with the show, the process is still very much the same, but you have that leg up because there's less downloading that the ASMs have to worry about giving you.
Mm.
Um, so it's a little easier, and that's why it's often best to use your PAs as your subs, because they are the next best person that knows the show. And also there's a it doesn't always happen, but there is a mindset that your PAs worked for very little money or were the backbone of a lot of your long days, that it's sort of um, it's good for morale for your team and for them and for yourself if you get to bump up your PAs.
Mm.
In terms of the actual process to learn a track, so if you know the show already, it's a little easier, because again, you know all the things. You're just learning how the show is structured during tech to make it fit into this room or this theater, because again, you know how it worked in the room where you had to move, the huge ass Christmas tree against the wall here, or else if you didn't, it got trapped over here. It's the same thing where like you just have to learn, because as a PA, you're not always on deck during tech, if at all. And if you are, it's not for every single moment. So you don't know where that tree tracks. So it's just learning that, like, okay, you have to know that the crew has to get that tree by this time, or else we're screwed for this next transition.
Mm.
Um, and you're sort of learning, in my opinion, I have found that as a Broadway sub versus someone who's on the deck for regional theater, you're having to, there's a little more care in knowing exactly how everything works backstage, because on Broadway and tours, the IATSE members can shift very often. You may have your starting crew that starts with you on a show, but it's not like a regional theater where you have the same crew from beginning to end, and maybe you get one replacement, or maybe you get one person who has a weekend off, and you don't really have to worry that they're gonna, forget something or not be present. You still have to watch things, but there's a little more. I find that there's more awareness in the fact that, like, okay, well, this today we have, Michael on prop stage, right? And then for the afternoon or for the evening show, you're gonna have Paul, and then for the Sunday show, you're gonna have Eric back. And it's like you've gone through three people on the same track, and they're bouncing around just as much um, in those tracks, that you're sort of like, okay, who is the person on this track now? And like, you really have to watch, okay, now's the time to go do this. And again, they're all very great. They're all, they have their own learning techniques that they're learning from their people. But sometimes you get someone who's, may come up to you and say, hey, remind me, is this on this cue or that cue? And you have to be able to know that. So we'll have our deck sheets. They're generally split between the sides of the stage left and stage right. Um, or sometimes if they're on bigger shows, you have a basement track, or you have a fly track where you have to go meet certain places. And those are all delineated between the number of people you have. And again, those are sort of dedicated to one. In regional theater, I find that since there's usually one ASM, the ASM is floating a lot more between stage left, stage right, the fly, and the basement, because they kind of feel like they have to be everywhere as the only equity member on a contract sometimes. But for Broadway musicals, there's generally, again, two people on deck most of the time, or the deck track gets built with two people and then sometimes solidified into one track because of budgets and etc. But yeah, you're going into the show, you're meeting the people, you're given, the contract, of course, also states how many times you're at minimum going to be given to train on a show, and it's up to the discretion of the PSM and the GM to talk if the show requires more training of an individual because of the show and circumstances. I find that happens more with the calling of a show as opposed to the deck of a show.
Right.
Because when I trained on Mean Girls and Jagged, I think I was given the 4 shows at Mean Girls and 3 shows at Jagged.
Mm.
Um, And it's just, yeah, it's just like you tend to shadow the first show, and you take your notes, you have their paperwork, you do what you need to do, you ask your questions, you observe, and you'll talk it out. And then the second show or third show, depending on how intricate the track is, you might shadow twice, you might shadow once, but generally after the second time, if you needed that many, you're the one then running the track with the actual ASM observing you and shadowing you to make sure you understand it. And then if that goes well, then the fourth or fifth time you're on your own, and you're doing it solo. And at that point, you're deemed approved, and you can do the track. Of course, that means you sometimes have to go home and do your homework and still kind of make it make sense to you, or get that one thing that you need to figure out how to make sense for it in your brain. It's also their paperwork might not work for you, so it's okay to take notes. It's okay to change, not their document, but
Right.
if you need to make your own document that will help you run the track as swiftly as the person who taught it to you, then by all means do that. Like, don't be afraid to create what you need to be successful at that job. um and that's also a lesson you need to learn, like that one has to learn. Like, I remember a couple of my first times, I was like, oh my god, this is theirs, they're the ASM, they're the Broadway ASM, I'm not. And like, I don't want to touch anything, or whatever. But it's really about, you're not changing anything, you're just making different words make sense for the exact same job for you.
Right.
And then calling's very different. It's not very different, but it's the same sort of method. You generally, there's a call script that is pre-typed out. By the time you're learning to call, by the time, unless you're the first, but if I'm talking about subbing in terms of this has already been done before, there's already a digital call script that has been created, and you'll get to hit file, save as your own version, and you'll sit next to the caller, whether it's the PSM or the first, and learn. You'll observe them, and you'll take your notes, and then you'll have the opportunity to watch a call video, which is the show recorded through an in-house camera, and it has the stage manager's voice connected to the feed, so you can actually hear exactly where they're calling, and where they're doing their standbys. So there's generally a little balance between shadowing them, sitting in the office and calling along to the video, or sometimes you need to tell SM that you need to sit with them again for this section to really take a couple more notes. You'll talk to them, you'll communicate with them, hey, for this section, what do you do here? For this section, I noticed this. And it's an open communication for all of it. You don't need to be like, oh my god, I didn't get it, so like I'm gonna mess up, or I can't ask the question. If you don't know, you need to ask.
Right.
And then that's all pre-built in, and that's all like great. And then you might start first calling the book scenes as opposed to the transition. So you'll both be on headset eventually, and you'll start to call. Great, all of the crazy transitions are done, and now we're in the scene, and it's really calling lights on. This person crosses stage left, this person sits down, there's build up in the lights here. So things that won't necessarily injure somebody if you call it a little off. So you'll generally call the book scenes, and then you'll start calling a couple of the transitions that are a little easier, and then you'll call like the harder transitions, and then eventually you'll get the full pass. Is generally how the call of a show works when you're learning.
Thank you. When you're learning the call from the current calling stage manager, is it a common expectation for you to adopt their language when calling? So,
I would say yes. Yes, because if it's not, I can understand that you might say, okay, I'm a lights person versus an electrics person in terms
yeah.
of the vernacular, but generally those terms are already sort of predetermined by what environment you're in. So for Broadway, a lot of times like Alex is sort of the vernacular that's carried across. But again, depending on, well, not even that. So I guess I should just say, when you come in to call a show, you have your main crew. You have everyone that has been doing that show, whether it's a month or a year long. They know what they're listening for their standbys. They know what they have come to understand from you as the caller's mouth that yes, you're, I think it's best to just sort of say this is how they, it was stand by auto deck 150 on the red. Whereas some people, they don't necessarily, I have seen call scripts, I haven't called them, but I've seen call scripts on shows I've done where, the show is a little more simple. So to have to identify every single color that gets used in the cue light system is not that important because it's usually one or two cue lights at a time. Whereas, a crazy show that needs like, 6 cue lights to stand by a transition, that color might be a little more something you want to include in your wind up. But yeah, I mean, I would say your best bet is to use exactly the same terminology.
So, okay. I made a disclaimer at the beginning of the interview that you can't share any Harry Potter secrets. So with that in mind, I understand if you can't answer my question to its full extent, but I'm wondering, as we're speaking about transitions, as a production assistant on The Cursed Child, what is the hardest deck move or transition backstage during the show?
Well, I can't say much.
I know.
But I mean, the thing is, every show has its own. I mean, the thing is, to answer that question, every show has its own um, technical elements and how those get layered in terms of your question of difficult or uh, challenging or life-threatening, even sometimes, depend on the show.
Mhm.
So to say that there's like a difficult deck move, I don't think is how I would describe functions on not just that show, but any show. Like again, like sometimes what you may think is like, oh, this is the transition that we're all going to get caught up on, may eventually smooth out and be the one that's the easiest once it's all sort of figured out and said and done. And then actually it's something else where you have to really know that this person goes here and that person goes here, and then you're clear to make this thing happen, but it's a part cue, so this has to go, and then these people have to get here in order to get this other thing going. So I think it's just, again, depending on what the show elements are, it's a little different. But also, as a stage managers, you like, since as a Broadway house, you're not the one making, moving and touching things, because that's what the IA individuals are there for. So it's not necessarily the same I mean, I don't know what the NYU exact setup is in terms of how they teach you, but you're a lot more hands off, so you're watching a lot more things. So to say that one is harder, I can say it's harder for certain crew individuals, but um, I'll just say that contingencies are good if you really need to have contingencies.
Thank you. You navigated around that so smoothly. Great job. I appreciate it. Yeah, as an ASM at Tisch, I'm definitely trying to implement ASM's adopting that practice of like, actually, when you're in this sort of theater, you're not going to be touching. So observing as much as possible. I Before we end our time together, I have, in the spirit of my mentor, Evangeline Whitlock, I would love to answer some lightning round questions right off the bat. So the first lightning round question is, do you prefer Word or Excel?
Both.
Okay, that is not the question. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
It varies on the paperwork. Once upon a time, I was all Excel, but there are some documents I've created that, for the ease of other people having to jump in and do it, I have had to switch to Word a couple of times.
Okay,
So I'm
just
thankful they both exist.
for me, anything but Google Sheets, we're all good.
I hate Google.
Yeah,
Don't know.
right. Hello. Don't buy into that organization. Okay. Mechanical or number two pencils?
Mechanical.
T. Font of choice.
Whatever the show font is.
Good assistant. Number one stage management kit essential.
Oof. Well, I haven't had a kitten, I don't know how long, but I make sure, oh, have something that makes the director happy.
Ooh, good answer. I like that. Um, Great. So that concludes all of my questions. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us and answering our questions.
Of course, thanks for having me. I hope it was informative for you and everyone else.
Yes. So that was our first interview in our series, everyone. If you want to come to our next week's meeting with Nicholas George Brown, and every week we'll be posting an interview on young stage managers. So follow our Facebook and Instagram, all on that handle. And I'll see you soon.